Coming up on this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast.
When we hear like AI is coming for recruiting, like if you're just answering applications and scheduling interviews and like sending offers to people that have applied and you're doing high volume recruiting, like that's going away. That will go away. Like AI will 100% handle all of those functions. People that have the ability to leverage talent intelligence, market data, and understand the competitive landscape are going to be the recruiters of the future. I think really recruiting is going to start looking a lot more like marketing.
Welcome to the Elite Recruiter Podcast with your host, Benjamin Mena, where we focus on what it takes to win in the recruiting game. We cover it all from sales, marketing, mindset, money, leadership, and placements.
I'm so excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast. Reason is because so often recruiters get blindsided with what happens to them in their careers. I remember like when I was an internal recruiter years ago, I thought we were growing. I thought things were like changing. I thought we were like taking over the world. All of a sudden, they laid off 20% of the recruiters. It blew my mind exactly what was happening. But at the same time, I also didn't understand the role and the impact a recruiter actually makes. When I was an internal recruiter, it really helped me change the game. And now that I work with other organizations, it has helped me understand and how to be a better support and team member with them. But I'm excited. I have an expert on this, Tommy Weinert, who is the founder of Mount Indy, to kind of really just like, we're going to break down exactly what recruiters need to be looking for, what they need to understand, how they cannot just be like, I'm a recruiter, but how do you be an impact player in the organization? So Tommy, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here. Yeah, really, really excited.
And on top of that, for listeners, I am so excited to have Tommy as one of the featured speakers in the Recruiting Growth Summit Finish the Year Strong. So make sure to get registered for that. That'll be in the show notes. Tommy, real quick, before we do a deep dive in your background, because I absolutely love your background, what are you doing now?
Yeah. So basically my wife and I run a business called Mount Indy, and we provide general recruiting services to the government contracting space, but we also kind of have some different services. So we do everything from direct placement to retained to consulting. And we also have a training arm of the company called Shadow Labs. And we've been doing our own business since 2018, but have been in the space since about 2008.
Awesome. Love it. And here's the cool thing about recruiting. Like technically we're competitors, but we're all growing. There's enough money in GovCon for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. So real quick on that, like I'm so stoked that like you're doing this because I've said that a lot. The government recruiting space is so tight-lipped because like there are only so many candidates. And I've seen on like the commercial side, like the recruiting community is way more like inclusive and like sharing. And I love that you're doing this because I feel like as government recruiters, we need to definitely like help each other out and kind of like, share our secret sauce with each other. So it's awesome.
So yeah, but totally with you about it. It's weird that we're so tight-lipped, the industry's tight-lipped, and we can go into that later. But okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm excited about is like your story, because like you weren't a recruiter to start off with.
No. Yeah, so I started in the hotel industry doing audiovisual setup. I was playing in bands and thought that was going to be my life. And what musicians did is they found jobs doing AV setup. So I was doing this, and after about 5 or 6 years, a lot of my coworkers left and went to do something. I didn't know what it was. I knew that they were making good money and they were like working with the government and they were, becoming very successful. So I said, hey, if they could do it, I could do it. And kind of like, put my tail between my legs and said, okay, I need to get a real career here, and went and did it and started as a recruiter for a government contractor. And literally within 30 days, my boss at the time quit, and I found myself like being set up to manage a $30 million prime contract, which I had no business like doing that. But my boss at the time really believed in me. The company was one of those companies that really believed in their, ownership was a huge thing. And like, they really like trained people to do the job the right way. And she really believed in me and set me up to do, program management for a Navy contract. The client really liked me. And then I started doing business development and program management and wrote a couple contracts that the company had wanted. Before I knew it, I was managing like, tens of millions of dollars in prime contracts while still recruiting. And yeah, that was kind of like my entry into the whole space.
So for people that don't understand government contracting, like in the reality, government contracting is a super complex, like government contractors are super complex staffing companies. But when we're sitting there throwing around tens of millions of dollars, and I throw around numbers in like the hundreds of millions of dollars, what does that mean actually?
So that contract was a $30 million contract over 5 years. So it was probably billing, what is that, $6 million a year, which was 30 employees on staff. And that was, about 30 employees.
And your job is like inside the GovCon space is you have to staff it up for the government or the government gets pissed, right?
Yeah. So essentially it's like, that's a really good point. Like the government contracting space, the government is the largest buyer of staffing services in the world. And this is a thing that a lot of people don't understand. So it's an awesome space for recruiters because all these companies are doing, not all of them, but the majority, what they do is they win contracts, and the contract is simply just, it's for people and it's to staff these programs for the government. So recruiting is like a critical component to government contracting, and I think you've said it before too, like a lot of times in our space, even our space doesn't realize this business that they're in sometimes. But yeah, once you win a contract with the government, essentially it's built on people. So it'll say like, this contract is for 20 people, let's say. And then it's the contractor's job to staff that up and then manage those people throughout the life of the contract. And those people are doing highly technical things, right? Like they're doing software development, or they're doing, engineering, or they're doing, I was doing remediation, or they're doing stuff like base operations support and, landscaping and janitorial. It's literally anything. So it's a crazy industry.
It's crazy, but it's fun. And like every time I run away, it keeps on pulling me back. So, okay, I think one of the things, and we'll talk about this in a bit, kind of like the focus of the conversation, but you grew there, you became the director of talent acquisition. What'd you do next? Like, what was the steps between there and your own company?
Yeah. So that company had been merged and acquired with like 10 times or something. And it just had been going through a lot of changes. And it came point to kind of redefine the way that the company did talent acquisition. And at that point, my then fiance and I at the time said, hey, maybe it's time to start our own business. Some other things happened that made it apparent that, hey, we should probably start our own business because the writing's on the wall. And what I mean by that is I got laid off. But essentially, I'll be completely honest. We said, let's start a recruiting firm, but let's do it in the tech space. Let's go after Amazon. Let's go after, Apple. And I'm not kidding. Like before we even left that job, we had clients asking us to like work for them in the government space. So we tried to do tech. We thought it was like sexy. And very quickly our network was like, hey, if you're starting a business, will you come work with us? And our network was all in the government space. So we got pulled in super quick and we saw like that's where our value was. But as far as the steps, I kid you not, there was no time lost. It was like laid off, severance, day after severance ended, business started. So we were very fortunate.
That is awesome. So you were already thinking about this before that layoff happened then, right?
I'm an entrepreneur. So I was like, I know at some point I'm going to have my own business. And this is kind of funny, but Mount Indy, what we originally wanted to do is we wanted to print for bands. We wanted to do merchandise, t-shirts, do screen printing. We wanted to get into that business. And we started to figure out how to do that and learn how to screen print, and realized very quickly that A, there was no money in it, and B, we were not good at it. So, to answer your question, I knew that I always wanted to have my own business, but I never thought it would be right back in the government space.
Really what we're here to talk about today is like the impact that a recruiter makes. And it's one of the things I think for you is, one, you were also a program manager, so you saw the end result. You were dealing with the P&L statements of a government contract. You were also staffing up, so you were seeing the whole picture, while most recruiters only see X, Y, Z. You see the very beginning. For a recruiter, how did they start going about and getting those experiences and learning about that? Because not everybody's kind of forced to be a program manager after 30 days in the job.
Yeah. I may discount like how critical that was to like my growth. In our space, it's easy, right? Like in the government contracting space, it's easy to see that. It's easy to see the correlation of if you don't bill somebody, if you don't fill a seat, you're losing money every day. Like literally that's what it is, right? And, one time my old CEO, he showed me this graph, and it was like one line was the amount of money that we could bill and one line was the amount of money that we were billing. And those two lines, once they separated, they never came back together. What he meant by that is all this revenue, if you can bill for 2,000 hours and you only bill for 1,900 hours, you never get that money back. You throw it in the toilet and you flush. So in the government, it's really easy to see that. You see the impact of vacant positions. Outside of the government, I think it's really important for recruiters to understand when they're hiring somebody, not, okay, do they meet the boxes? Do they check all the boxes? Do they have the degree? Do they have the right skill sets? But what is the impact that this person is going to have into the organization? And more importantly, what is the impact if we don't hire this person? It could be delivery of software. It could be you don't have enough customer service people. The brand could be damaged. The first step is understanding, what happens if we don't hire this person? What is the impact on the organization? And then you start thinking about things a little bit differently when you think about it versus just saying, hey, do these people check the box and then moving on to the next thing, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And another question I wanted to ask you on this is like, in the government contracting space, you can almost many times see the layoffs coming if you're a recruiter based on how you win or how you don't win or lose a recompete or all this nature. But you don't see it as much with these like larger organizations that are, publicly traded and that kind of stuff. How can like a recruiter start looking at the end business numbers and the end business goal to figure out like where I'm at if I'm even going to be safe?
Yeah, that's really difficult. And I think a different way to answer that question for me is like, it's so important for recruiters, especially newer recruiters or younger professionals, to get a mentor, right? Because it's very difficult. Like some of these companies, you go in with the promise of changing the world. Like WeWork is the greatest example, right? Like we are changing the world. It's like, no, dude, you're renting office space. But everyone that worked there got sucked into this dream of like being part of like this massive thing that's going to change the world. The reality is you're subletting office space and renting it. Like that's all you're doing. And the writing is on the wall of how successful that can or can't be. And I think that I would always rather know, I've said this example before, like I want to know that like, what are my goals? And if I hit them, I'm okay. And if I don't hit them, I have something to worry about. So I think that that's how recruiters need to like think about their job is like, what are the business goals and is the business achieving them? Are they making money? And that's the easiest way to figure out if you're going to be safe. Let me say one more thing about that. So the mentorship is important because if you're younger, you need somebody to kind of help you see this. I was told one time, when your boss stops getting support, start to worry. And I think that that was like a very interesting barometer of like, if your boss stops getting support in what they're doing, there's something to maybe consider. And that example was given to me because of like mergers and acquisitions. And they were saying like, hey, if you get acquired and your boss is like not getting the attention that they need in that acquisition, you probably have something to worry about. But I think it probably relates to every business.
I mean, that's like the perfect thing. So often, like, you don't know that your boss is going to not have that support anymore unless you're like keeping an eye and having conversations and all that other stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, but like kind of what you're saying too, is it's like, there's people that just want to like show up, do their job, and that's fine. Right. But there's other people that it's like want to get into like the bigger understanding of the business. And I think the opportunities to do that are abundant, especially in our space. Recruiting is the perfect transition into like project management or program management or business development or capture. And what I've found in a lot of defense contractors or government contractors is all you have to do is ask. If you're a recruiter that wants to learn about project management, tell a project manager or a program manager, hey, I want to learn about what you do. I've seen a lot of companies say, hey, let's let that person shadow with you a little bit so they can learn that part of the industry, and hopefully we can move them into that type of role in the future. So the other thing about like the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right?
Ooh, it so does.
Yeah.
I've seen it career-wise, and I think I've missed so many opportunities because I believed in just getting the job done, and that would say everything.
Right. I've seen so many people that didn't get the job done and get promoted, right? It's literally like it's so true. Like you have to ask for what you want. That would be something for like, I think that people should really consider is like, you have to put your name in the hat, right? You have to stick up for yourself when it comes to that stuff.
What if you feel like you're not ready yet? Should you still stick your name in the hat?
Man, I don't feel like I'm ready to run a business like right now. You know what I mean? I feel like everyone struggles with imposter syndrome. And if you don't struggle with imposter syndrome, you're a sociopath. Everyone should have a healthy amount of self-doubt because that shows that you're humble. But how do you get over that self-doubt to then hop in the ring? I don't know the answer to that other than, I don't know. Some people are very hesitant to do that because of imposter syndrome. But yeah, I don't know.
So taking a few steps back and back to focusing on organizational goals and business goals, like, is there other things that recruiters should be like trying to get involved or trying to understand across that board?
Yeah, I think how the company makes money, right? Like every recruiter, not every recruiter, but recruiters in GovCon know how we make money, right? Like we know if we're filling positions, the company's doing well. We know if we're not filling positions, we're probably not growing. We know if people are leaving the company and we're not backfilling them, we are shrinking. Like it's very clear. So if you're in the situation where people are leaving your company and you're not backfilling them, as a recruiter, you should be like, something's coming. Like I need to look for another position. Like we're not growing. And if you're not growing, recruiting oftentimes is the first group of people to get the axe. But I think really understanding how your company makes business or makes money and are they achieving that goal?
I think there's a huge difference, or going to be a huge difference of people that like understand that. And those are the recruiters that are really going to start getting ahead because, they're going to look at teams of recruiters and like, who's here that's actually going to make a difference? And I hate to say this, I think like people that are just focused on just getting the job done and not really adding value and that kind of stuff will be impacted in the future of recruiting. That kind of goes in my next question is, where do you see the future of recruiting, especially in GovCon and then across the board?
Yeah, it's 100% more in an advisory role for sure. It's going to be people that have the ability to leverage talent intelligence, market data, and understand the competitive landscape are going to be the recruiters of the future. I think really recruiting is going to start looking a lot more like marketing. And, this is a whole thing, but there's so much noise in the market. AI is great, but right now you can see how people are using it. They're making drip campaigns with bad messages and inundating people with messages. The response rates are going down. Candidates are becoming harder and harder, especially in our space, to connect with and engage with. And that's because of all the noise. And real recruiters, not real recruiters, but the recruiters of the future are going to be able to generate engagement, kind of like an influencer. Actually, I'm giving a talk about this. The new sourcing is influence. It's going to be people that are able to bring eyes to the brand and people that are going to generate engagement. So that's going to be a huge skill set, but also being able to look at the market and be more of an advisor to companies. Like the role is going to be elevated and it's up to us to elevate it. What is going to go away is and this is when we hear like AI is coming for recruiting, like if you're just answering applications and scheduling interviews and like sending offers to people that have applied and you're doing high volume recruiting, like that's going away. That will go away. Like AI will 100% handle all of those functions. And AI will definitely like handle some of the sourcing functions too, but it's going to be like the future is for people who can turn this into an advisor role and kind of create influence in the market, if that makes sense.
I got a few questions on that. First of all, I know in our space, like candidates are just getting absolutely flooded with messages. And, if a TSSCI, SEI, data engineer with a full scope poly pops up, there's like 95 recruiters hitting them in one day.
Yeah.
How do you actually, as a recruiter, be the one person that they respond to?
As much as it pains me to say this, like the bar is so low. The messages that FSP person is getting, they're all the same. It's literally the same message. And so few recruiters take the time to personalize their messaging. And I don't mean by saying like, just putting the first name. I mean like really figuring some stuff out on that candidate. The bar in that sense is so low. So I think it is easier to create that engagement and get that connectivity with that client or that candidate if you're putting some real effort into your messaging. This is a lot to this too. Like it's strategic. What time are you sending them the message? The amount of recruiters that aren't cold calling blows my mind. Like call those people that are in a skiff the second they get, go on their lunch break or the second they get out of the office, send them text messages, emails, like all of this has to be strategic. I think the data is if your email does not get opened within the first hour that it's sent, the chances of it getting opened are less than 1%. So if you think about that, why would you be contacting somebody in a skiff at 9 a.m. on a Monday, right? Like, you're wasting your time. So it's all of those things. Recruiters have to think about, how can I strategically send this message to increase the chance that it gets opened? Can I put some like effort into my messaging so this person doesn't think that it's just a spam message? How aggressive am I going to be in my outreach? Like, I think you and I both know, like, you can't give up after 1 or 2 phone calls and think that you did your job. You have to be out there.
8, 9, 10.
Totally. People laugh at me sometimes when I say that, but I'm like, how bad do you want to fill the position? It's different for us on the agency side. I want to fill that position really bad. So I'm going to do whatever it takes. And I think that's a good message for internal recruiters. Like, agency, sometimes people are like, oh, they're like sleazy or whatever, but like, my team is working hard, and I'm your competition sometimes, and I'm also your partner sometimes. But you have to understand that there's agencies out there filled with good recruiters that are like willing to do what it takes to fill those positions. And if that means, making phone calls at 5 a.m. or, 5 to 8 p.m., that's what they're doing.
Man, in the GovCon space, like, because of the skiffs, I always joke around. I'm like, I remember years ago, a company back when I was internal recruiter, like, well, you have to be in the office from 8 to 5. And I'm like, I can't get a hold of anybody between 8 and 5. Like, what's the point of me sitting here? I'm like, all my time is like in the evenings and the weekends.
It would be so interesting if there was like a night shift. Like, I've heard of companies thinking of that, like, or saying like, let's do 10 to 7 or something like that. That's the beautiful thing about being in San Diego, is I get the advantage of the time zone calling back east. So my, works out well.
And I don't want to take away from, I think it's going to be your talk at SourceCon, but could you like talk a little more about recruiters being influencers for their organization, for the talent attraction?
Yeah.
And demand.
Yeah, I almost hate using the term influencer, but look, there's a ton of influencers popping up in our space. Some are good and some are evil. Like, I joke about that, but like, there's some really good ones, and some that I'm like, they perpetuate, these myths that I totally, hate. But literally, if you think about the difference between passive and active candidates, our space is 100% passive, right? Like, the GovCon cleared space is passive. The more noise there is, the less they're going to be coming to some of the sites that, provide value currently. A lot of our candidates are not on LinkedIn. What it's going to be is, we have to have the ability to generate conversations that create engagement through this influence. The beautiful thing about it is, it's going to be strengthening like employer brand. So recruiters are going to really leverage like the recruitment marketing side of recruiting. And it's not going to be about like just posting your job description and saying we're hiring for XYZ role. It's going to be about creating discussion around DevOps or the key capabilities that your company currently works within, and learning more about the technologies that we recruit for and creating discussion around those things, because that is what's going to attract the candidates. We all know job descriptions don't do it. So that's kind of what I mean about, becoming an influencer in the space is going to be less around outward, hey, we're hiring, and more around, let's create a discussion around, the software factory ecosystem in the DoD and what's happening there. Let's talk about platform engineering. And so recruiters are going to have to get very good at the skills that they're recruiting on to be able to create those discussions.
You definitely have to have like either understanding of the work or a deeper understanding of people.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we see it with the influencers that are in the market right now. I'm not going to name any specifically, but there's some that if they post, they get so much engagement, like unbelievable amounts of engagement on every post. And I never see them posting jobs. And these are active recruiters. Every once in a while, I'll see them say, I'm hiring on this project, blah, 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 and they get blown up. But it's already proving to be very, very successful.
So as a recruiter yourself, you're working at an agency, internal, you have your own firm, and you're looking at starting to create this like influence in my space and in my niche. What are some of the first things that you should, like, we'll say first 3 things that you should probably do in the next 30 days to start doing something?
That's tough, because I have definitely not cracked the nut on this. You know what I mean? So I don't want anyone to think that I have. I would say the things that I see a lot of people that do this very well talk about is the authenticity of it. I mean, even taking a step back, like, some people are so hesitant to even post. Some people don't, like, all they'll do is share a job, but they won't go out and say anything personal on LinkedIn, let's say. And that's a huge barrier. So the first step is literally being like, okay, this is going to sound crazy, but like, what's my persona? Like, what am I going to post as? How do I want to be perceived out there? Do I want to be perceived as authentic? Do I want to be considered, like for me, example, like I want to be in the GovCon space. When people think of me, I want people to think about GovCon recruiting. So you kind of have to develop your like online persona in regards to like, what are you going to post about? What's your personal brand? And then you have to get used to posting, which it's unbelievable how little recruiters actually post content. Yeah.
I think two things on this. I think LinkedIn said is something like only 1% of the people on the platform actually post. Yeah. Everybody else is lurking. So like really like your barrier is you do a few posts and you're already past 99%. But like talking about the persona, like me and my wife have actually been talking about a bit of a rebrand. Yeah. I actually had somebody recently who's like, do you even do recruiting? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, recruiting every day. That's what pays for the podcast.
Right. Right.
But like talking about like, what do you want to be known for? And what do you want people in your network to see you as? And you have to be, like you said, diligent about sharing that, diligent about building that, diligent about posting about that, which means I need to post a little more about GovCon.
Yeah. There's dangers to it too. It's different for somebody working for a major company. And I want to, right? Like it's easy for me and you. We can go out and say whatever we want. Like nobody's going to, I mean, my wife might get mad at me, but like, you know what I mean? Like there's no boss that's going to say, hey, you shouldn't have said that. This is something else I'm thinking about is like, this is kind of like a warning to like companies. Like if your recruiters are showing the desire to post and the creativity and they're going out of their way to do it, the last thing in the world you can do is bring your marketing department down on them being like, this is not on brand. Like you have to only post like this. This is not our marketing message. So this is going to be a big issue too, is companies that want to do this stuff, their communications departments are going to for sure be like, red flag, no way. So that's going to be another hurdle that companies have to really figure out is like, are we okay with our recruiters out there basically influencing with our company name under their name on their LinkedIn profile? And I guarantee you so many companies are going to say absolutely not. And those companies are going to get left behind. I'll just tell you one thing someone said to me once, and this is like this is going to date me, but when LinkedIn was like really starting to pick up, we had an internal conversation about building LinkedIn brands. Like every recruiter needs to build their LinkedIn brand. This is when I worked for another company. And one of the executives was like, well, literally what happens if they build up like these people, like when they leave our company, do those people stay or do they like go with the recruiter? And I'm like, no, it's their network. Like they own it. And there was even a hesitancy then to be like, well, that seems like weird. You know, companies will definitely have a problem with this whole marketing.
I've seen that. I do know of a very large defense contractor who like they want to be in charge of exactly what every recruiter posts.
Yeah. Which
I think is a waste of time. And it's like not making, like nothing looks authentic anymore. It just looks like the same post that we saw like a decade ago of like XYZ, here's the job. But like, man, you hit the nail on the head. So I encourage you, if you want this company, still keep on building your own brand. Guess what? Yeah. You get hired by somebody else.
Well, and it's an important skill set in the future. And look, like, I don't know how we could figure this out, but I would be super interested to find out how much content on LinkedIn, like how much data is literally just reposts of jobs. Like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, Ashley's hiring or Bill's hiring. Like, I would love to know of the volume of posts on LinkedIn. If anyone out there can figure that out, what is the volume of posts that is simply just reposting of corporate content? And what is the engagement on that? I guarantee it's lower than everything else.
Spot on. Well, go back to the GovCon side of the house. What are some of the biggest lessons that you have learned in building a recruiting business within the GovCon space?
There's a lack of investment in recruiting for a lot of companies, whether that's, the refusal to work with agencies or, the lack of investment in their internal team, which I've never understood because that is literally how we make money. In the government contracting space, like you said at the beginning, they're staffing companies. I came from a company that literally was a staffing company that figured out that they could win government contracts. So I've always seen staffing at the core of government contracting. So for as long as I've been doing this, it still surprises me at how sometimes corporations refuse to invest in that internal function. And a lot of times consider that function to be like junior, which has always surprised me. So that's a big thing. But there's a huge opportunity in that too. I think another just general business lesson is, not every client's a good client. I read this somewhere too, it doesn't matter if you have a signed contract, they are not your client until they pay you. And that's really helped with like prioritization of work. Like, hey, we've got this like one new contract and, you know, we got a great fee on it and the potential of X, Y, and Z, but it's like, they're not a client until they pay you. And a lot of times business owners, recruiters, agency people will get stuck chasing after potential revenue that may never materialize. Have you felt that?
I was going to actually kind of go into my next question that you have is outside of GovCon, like we have this world call it with like prime contractors, subcontractors, teaming partners, and that kind of stuff. It's so easy when you get started as a recruiter in the space to like, oh, look, I got an agreement. And then you find out that they're one of 17 other like sub-Ks on the project that everybody else has their own staffing companies too. And then prime ends up filling it. If a recruiter's in there like having a conversation with a potential GovCon company, and this is probably going to save me a lot of people reaching out. Like, how do you vet whether they're going to be a client that you can actually fill something with versus a client that you're just going to spin your wheels on?
Yeah. Again, like I don't have this completely figured out and everyone is different. Like, right? Like every single company is different. They operate in different ways. The easiest thing is to that example, if it's like multiple subcontractors on the same contract, do you have workshare, right? Like, do you have guaranteed workshare? So what I mean by that is for those listening is though it's subcontract, is this guaranteed your position? And if they say no, that drastically reduces the chance that I'm going to get a hire out of the position. I look at like pay. How much are you paying? What's your benefit package? Those are obvious things. So if they're paying below market, if their benefits are bad, you know, these are reducing the chances that you're going to fill the position. But then you start talking about like KPIs on the other side. And, you know, so you could say to your teams, if I'm able to present you with a candidate, can you agree to, you know, responding with feedback within 24 hours on that candidate? And if they don't do that, like it's going to reduce the chance that you're going to fill the position. So these are all things that we look at. Also, like on the East Coast, you know, DC, Maryland, there's all of these Intel contracts that like everyone is on. And if it's one of those contracts and you're a staffing agency and it's full scope and it's a subcontract and it's like reverse engineering at the full scope polygraph level for 150, like forget it. You know, you're not going to fill it. And that may discourage a lot of people, but you have to be realistic. And I had this conversation with a client once, the full scope poly work, this is getting in the weeds, but like you don't have to have a facility clearance to hold a full scope poly because the agency holds it. So any staffing company, GovCon or not, can go subcontract that position and fill it. So for me to work with a subcontractor on a full scope polygraph role on one of those large Intel contracts, I would much rather find the prime and say, hey, here's the person, write me a subcontract for this person and make way more money doing it. And for people out there saying there's no way that'll happen, I know companies that are like 50, 60 employees deep right now that's all they do. And so, I mean, if I had the network to do that, that's what I would be doing. So it doesn't make sense. I kind of went on a rant there, but like those are the things that I look at.
Tommy, just to let you know, like when I get some questions about stuff, I'm just going to cut this part of the podcast out and send it to him.
Yeah, right.
Because I get so often like people reach out to me like, hey, I just got this new contract to work on XYZ full scope poly. And I'm just like, cool.
Yeah. You know, you and everyone else. And again, that's not to like, I get it. Like that's a whole space that people operate in, but it's not something to cut your teeth on. You know what I mean? You can get lucky, but it's tough work.
And one other thing for the listeners, like when we talk about like salary things, like many times these government contracts have max salaries. They bid it to win the work, but they didn't bid it to fill it at market rates. So that's something you have to analyze in your conversations. So definitely thank you for pointing that out, Tommy.
Yeah.
Before we jump over to the quickfire questions, is there anything else that you want to share, like either about your story, how you ended up in this wonderful world of recruiting, about, you know, being like understanding and aligning yourself with organizations and organizational goals or AI?
I mean, I'll just say this, like, and I talk to my team about this all the time, right? Like the fundamental recruiting has never changed. Fundamentally is always the same. There's a job and you have to find people to fill it. The way that we do it is different, but there are tried and true things that happen in recruiting that will never change. And so much about recruiting is learning these things, learning these like, you know, candidate behaviors that are red flags or client behaviors that are red flags, or, you know, having a process that gets people through quickly. Like there's a lot about recruiting that people learn the hard way. And I would just advise people to kind of remember that like a lot of that old school stuff is tried and true. And even though AI is going to change everything, like fundamentally the business is going to stay the same. Just how we get there is different.
Love it. Well, jumping over to the quickfire questions.
Yep.
What advice would you give to a recruiter that's actually just getting started in an industry this year?
Whatever tools you have available to you, whether it's clearance jobs, whether it's Dice, whether it's Career Builder, whether it's LinkedIn Recruiter, learn every button on that product. So many companies and teams do not understand the capabilities of the products that they have. And I guarantee if you're a new recruiter starting out and you dig into one of those tools, you will find things that even the senior people on your team don't know exist within those platforms. So learn every single button on every tool that you have and ask the vendors for training. So like if it's clearance jobs, contact clearance jobs and say, I want a training, they'll give it to you.
They will.
Yeah.
The same question, but for people that have been around the block 5, 10, 20, 25 years in recruiting, what advice would you give to them to still see success or be successful?
I see a lot of people, kind of to my point earlier, they forget the basics and they start kind of augmenting their process to get away from some of the stuff that made them successful in the first place. It's really important to always kind of revisit the basics and the fundamentals, especially when we're going to go through change, right? Like, especially when we have all this stuff with AI happening. But yeah, so that, and figure out a way to like stay positive, because that's another thing. This industry drains people. The negativity just,
Talk about positivity and like on those bad days, those bad weeks, or even those bad months, like how do you get yourself out of those ruts?
Yeah, another thing that I'm not like the greatest at, right? But like for me, I just started journaling a lot. That's a big thing. But yeah, you have to I think it's so important to celebrate the little wins. I didn't see it. Somebody told me Huberman has a whole discussion about like training your brain to like seek the challenge, not the big end result. So in recruiting, we're always like, oh, we got the fill, right? But it's so important to be like, hey, like I had a great conversation. I'm going to celebrate that. Or I utilize some new sourcing technique that worked. I'm going to celebrate that. I, overcame an objection and handled it very well. I'm going to celebrate that. So like kind of celebrating all the little wins and stop focusing on just the start or the signed offer letter, because it's so few and far between.
What is working in business development right now?
For business development, I mean, it's literally like, it's the outward marketing, to be completely honest. I'll tell you this, like when I speak to a client that's a fit, there's this whole idea of like instantly at the call, like, oh, we get it. Like they get it, I get it. You know what I mean? That works. And what that is we understand our niche. Like we do not pretend to be what we are not. And we are like super deep in what we recruit in. And clients instantly recognize that. And that's a huge differentiator for us because it saves them time in the long run and headaches.
Awesome. Fantabulous. Do you have like a favorite rec tech tool?
So I love Loxo. Like we've been on Loxo since 2018. Love Loxo. I think it's great. I think it's got its issues too, but like people are sleeping on that tool. I love it. It's growing huge, but it's a great tool. Loxo's awesome.
Awesome. Do you have like a book that's had a huge impact on your own personal career?
It's called Unreasonable Hospitality, I think is what it was called. And it's about this restaurant team that built the #1 rated restaurant in New York. And it's just this idea about like how to delight people, right? Like how to provide unreasonable hospitality in everything that you do. Just reading that book it really changed the way I looked at like client interactions, and not only client interactions, but candidate interactions, right? Like just creating this unreasonable amount of joy for the people that we work with, and how can we do that in our space? So I think a lot about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think one of the cool things with your background is, while you used to work at Blockbuster, used to work with bands. I love that like Blockbuster was your headline for a bit too, for a little while. I've followed you and known you for a little while.
Yeah.
But like you've had a lot of success. Like you literally you got laid off. The next day you started your business. The next day you got clients. The next day you're building your company. You and your wife are just like teamed up together, just keep on building. What do you think has been a big driver for your own personal success?
I've always had that entrepreneur mind, and, a great example from my dad in regards to, business. But, recently it's been more about like the mentorship that I've surrounded myself with. I think Brian Fink just posted today something about like You can't expect greatness when you're surrounded by bad stuff or something. And to me, it's like the whole idea of like, you are the sum of the 6 people you spend the most time with. That's like you. So I've really been trying to surround myself with the right people, the right business mentors, getting in the right conversations. I think that's huge. And I think also that kind of happens with age, right? Like you're not as interested in that when you're a little bit younger. But for me, it's been about that. And then, I've had a kid recently. So there's some pressure of like, it has to work kind of thing, but it's a lot about mentorship. I've mentioned mentorship a couple of times. I just want to like tell people too, like there's not like a mentorship committee that you go find mentors in. Like if you respect people online and they're doing something that you want to do, ask them. Like just start having conversations with people and you'll be surprised what you learn through the unofficial network.
Virtual mentorships, curate your feed.
Yeah, totally. So that's something too that I love, like this whole idea about curating your feed. This is a big learning lesson. Like I'll see something on LinkedIn that will send me down a rabbit hole and I'll get pissed. And then when I find myself doing that, I just start unfollowing those people. And it's crazy what happens to your state of being when you do that.
Oh, awesome. Well, the next question I'm going to ask like 2 different ways.
Yeah.
First is going to be at the very, very beginning of your recruiting career. And maybe like when you were kind of like jumping into like the program management and recruiting. And the second is going to be like when you started your company.
Mm-hmm.
If you can go back in time and have a conversation with yourself with all the lessons that you've learned, your ups, the downs, the successes, the wins, the placements. If you could go back and sit down with Tommy when he was a first recruiter, what advice would you give yourself?
One would probably be sack away way more money. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, and I think about this a lot, is double down on LinkedIn. Like get in there on LinkedIn, figure out how to use it and build a brand. And I think about that a lot. Like what tool is that right now? 10 years from now, if I could have that, you know what I mean? That go back conversation to today, what am I sleeping on? Like what tool should I be like tripling down on right now? But that would be it. I would look, throw everything you got at LinkedIn as far as recruiting goes.
Have you found that tool to triple down on?
No, I don't know what it is yet. I think it's the idea of influence marketing, but I don't know if it's a tool or anything yet.
And what about like same question, but for, we'll say like the month or 2 after you started Bound Indie, like building a business is completely different than just being like an internal recruiter or a TA manager. What advice would you give yourself on that entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, it's tricky. Like I feel like a lot of my heartburn early on was around bad clients, maybe, or not bad clients, but bad deals that we put together. I would say probably don't wait too long to like raise your prices. I think a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to this is you come in low at the beginning because, you've got no experience as a business and you get stuck with a lot of legacy clients. And once somebody's in at a certain rate, you can never get that person or company up, right? It's very hard to increase prices. So early on, I would have said potentially be very weary of long-term low price contracts.
Awesome. Well, Tommy, this has been an awesome conversation. I know in the GovCon space, like we see our value so much easier, but it's something that I think every recruiter, whether you're internal talent acquisition, whether you're an agency recruiter or you own your own firm, it's figuring that out so you can be the best for your clients. But I always enjoy like chatting GovCon, so been super excited on that.
Yeah.
But for the listeners, if they want to follow you, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, like right now, the best place is LinkedIn. That's where I'm putting most of my content out. So just, find me on LinkedIn. It's Tommy Weinert on LinkedIn, and then mountindy.com for our company website. But yeah, that's the best place to get at me is at LinkedIn.
Well, Tommy, before I let you go, is there anything else that you would love to share with your listeners?
No, just looking forward to seeing this come out. I'm really excited I had the opportunity to chat with you here today. This is great.
Awesome. Well, for the listeners, I want you guys to keep crushing it. Make 2024 your best year yet. And actually also check out Tommy at the Finish the Year Strong Summit. It's going to be awesome. We're going to have an entire GovCon conversation. He's part of an awesome panel. But man, keep crushing it, guys. Keep working hard. And I believe in you. All right. Thanks.